outsourcing your no-code apps development, or taking the DIY approach and building it yourself. Which is right for you? And if you've already chosen, did you choose correctly? That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to break down the process from start to finish of what each of these is going to look like for you from a founder's viewpoint, whether you are building the app yourself or outsourcing. And we're going to break down the pros and cons of each. Now, make sure you stick around until the end, because we're also going to we're going to talk about what this looks like in those post MVP development stages. So after you've built that initial product, what do these processes look like from there? So stick around for that as well. Now, if you're new around here, my name is Kristen, and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No-Code Apps, where we help business owners and industry experts build custom apps to start their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses, all without coding. So let's dive into this. What I'm going to do is share my screen with you, and we're going to jump over to the whiteboard so we can break this down. So there are really 4 main stages in the app development journey, or the app creation journey, that you are going to go through. Now, the first is essentially the let me get a different color here so you can see this better. It's the pre-MVP stage. Now, this is where you're going to be validating your app idea, that solution that you're wanting to build. You're going to be potentially researching your target market, for example, and so on. So what goes into this stage is usually a lot of research and strategy, and also refinement. You're refining that app idea, that app solution that you have as you do that research. Now, moving past the pre-MVP stage, you're going to move into the MVP build. Now remember, an MVP is a minimum viable product. This is the version of your app that you're creating in order to start testing that core product and get feedback. So this is the initial MVP build phase. There's going to be lots of different development stages afterwards, but this focuses on the MVP. So really, we're talking about the core development of your initial app in this stage. Now, after you've created that MVP, you're going to move into the post-MVP stage. And this is where you start testing that minimum viable product. You start getting feedback, and you start iterating. You start streamlining, enhancing the app, adding on new features, focusing more on user experience, and so on. So really, in this stage, your main priorities are going to be testing and iterating. And then post MVP, after you've developed that core product, you've tested it, you've iterated it, you're going to move into this stage where it's essentially ongoing development, where you're going to be maintaining the app and also expanding. So in this stage, and this really continues throughout the lifetime of your app, you're going to be maintaining it. So maintaining that existing feature set and pushing fixes and updates where necessary, and also expanding your feature sets. You're going to be adding new features, adding new functionality, solving more problems with your app beyond that core problem. You might be bringing on new user types, for example. So this is just an ongoing maintenance and expansion phase. Now, depending on whether you go the DIY route, where you're doing it yourself, you're building the app by yourself, or outsourcing, each of these stages is going to look different. Now, there are some similarities, there is some overlap, but there is naturally going to be some differences as well. So for the DIY phase or option in that pre-MVP stage, this is really going to involve, again, a lot of research and more research, and inevitably some guesswork too. Because, as an entrepreneur stepping into this no-code space, generally you don't have experience in this process already. This is probably relatively new for you, if not completely new for you. That means you might not have experience going through that pre-MVP stage. So naturally, it's going to involve a lot of research just to get that solution validated, to research your market and so on. But research in just figuring out how to do this in the first place. So there is going to be some guesswork in there. If you're building your app yourself, it is inevitable. So that pre-MVP stage is going to involve a lot of research, but expect it to involve some guesswork too. Now, when you move forward into that MVP build stage, where you're focusing on the core development, this in the DIY approach is going to involve lots and lots of learning and lots of trial and error. When you're using no-code tools to build your app, you're visually programming your app. There is still going to be a learning curve, not only with understanding how to use the tools to your best advantage, but also figuring out how to think like a developer. How do you approach the development of your MVP strategically, effectively, efficiently? There's a lot of learning that's going to go into this, and inevitably, and as a result of, a lot of trial and error as well. And that is something that you just have to expect. It's not going to be easy or seamless the first time through, or even potentially the next and the next if you choose to build multiple apps. There's going to be trial and error involved. Now, moving forward into that post-MVP stage, after you have that core product built and you start to test and iterate, again, it's going to involve more learning, more trial and error, and more research at this stage, because you not only have to continue learning and kind of trial and erroring your way through building those iterations, but you also have to understand how to test your app effectively. Testing is a really big part of the development process, and it's often something that's really overlooked. A lot of people come into this thinking that they just need to build their app and then they'll reach the finish line. But the reality is, testing is a full and extensive process in and of itself, and there are certain ways that you need to test your app in order to prepare it for your real live users to come on. So again, you're going to be learning a lot here. You're going to be doing a lot of trial and error, whether that's with your development post MVP or with working directly with your users. And it's going to involve more research along the way as you move into these later stages and familiarize yourself with the processes involved. Now, after that post-MVP stage, when you go into that ongoing maintenance and expansion phase throughout the lifetime, or the rest of your app's lifetime, you're going to be focused, again, on learning, again, on some trial and error, but also on potentially outsourcing. Now, this might sound strange because we're in this DIY path here, but what we found is that a lot of entrepreneurs want to build that core app themselves and get that idea out of their head and build it in the way that they've envisioned, that they are in control of. But once they get into that phase where they start to expand the app and they need to maintain it, and they're moving into more advanced and complex development components, they decide that they want to start to build a team around themselves. And so maybe they hire a full-time or a part-time developer, for example, to maintain it while they focus on some more of the business components, for example. This can look a lot of different ways. You don't have to do that by any means. You can build and maintain and expand your app on your own, and that's completely fine. That's what some entrepreneurs do as well. So if that's the case, this stage is going to involve more learning, more trial and error, for example, and just expanding on all of that. But if you did decide to bring on a team member or build a team, then potentially in those ongoing phases, you could start to outsource, or instead of outsourcing, kind of bring it in-house with your own team. That would be up to you. Now, if you are outsourcing from the start, again, there's going to be some overlap here, but this process is going to look a lot different. And it might sound obvious as to what it should look like. If you're just handing it off, you're doing nothing, right? That's not actually the case. There is going to be a lot of different pieces and components that you yourself have to put in place, even if you are outsourcing. So in that initial pre-MVP stage, now you are still going to be doing research here because you're still needing to validate your app idea, for example. You still need to do that market research. You still need to understand what your core product should look like in the first place. That's what that pre-MVP stage is going to look like for you regardless. But if you're outsourcing, you might get help with this because some agencies, depending on who you work with, will have a process where they help you through this strategy and refinement phase where you're refining that idea and you are sort of scoping what that minimum viable product should look like. So sometimes that won't be the case, sometimes it will. This will depend. Now, when you move into the MVP build phase, this naturally is going to start to be hands-off for you, but you also very likely will be playing the project manager role. Now, some agencies will have a dedicated project manager to oversee your app's development. That would be the person you would be communicating with, and that project manager would be communicating with the development team actually building your app. But you have to understand that when the actual development starts, you're taking your own app idea that lives in your brain currently, and you are conveying it to someone else who has never visualized or thought through this app idea, who doesn't have potentially the years of experience dealing with the problem that this app solves, who doesn't deal with those processes, for example, day in and out. So regardless of whether there is a project manager already in place with an agency, you're still going to be playing that role to some extent because there are going to be lots and lots of revisions involved. Part of a product is going to be built. You're going to be able to review it potentially and start making changes to make sure it better conveys your vision, for example. So you're going to be playing that project manager role. And when you move into the post-MVP stage, this is going to be the same. So this is when you start testing and iterating. Now, the testing, when you start doing the user testing, this will sometimes be completely on your end. So you have to understand how to take test users through your app, how to run beta tests. So this can involve, again, some learning and some research, but sometimes an agency will help you with this, depending on the type of agency you're working with. But the actual development, again, will be hands-off for you, and you'll still need to play that project manager role, especially if you are the one doing the user testing on your own, because you're gonna have to be coming back with that feedback to help then iterate the app. So post-MVP, after that, when you move into the ongoing maintenance, the ongoing expansion of your app, this is going to involve, again, some of the same, where you are either hands-off, where the agency is still taking control, you're playing that project manager role, but you also might start to build a team at this stage. So this is where we sometimes see the overlap, again, between both routes, the DIY and the outsourcing. Now, you might work with an agency for that initial development, but for the maintenance and the expansion, you might want to bring a developer or a team of developers in-house, for example, or you might just want to work with a developer team of developers in a more consistent and ongoing way that's not with a full-blown agency, for example. So again, you can do the same as with the DIY route where you start to build that team around you. Now, when you are outsourcing, you don't have the option of doing that maintenance or expansion on your own, obviously. So regardless, you're still going to be outsourcing, but whether that ends up being with your own team that you build or with an agency, that is going to be up to you. So Now that we know what each of these processes look like and what these stages involve for each, let's talk about the pros and cons. So, there are some positives and some negatives to each of these routes. Now, with the DIY approach, where you are building the app yourself, one of the positives is that you're saving money. This is an obvious one. If you're building your app yourself, you are naturally going to be saving money. Now, you might still be spending money, for example, for your own training to help you build those skills that you're going to need, but it's going to be vastly less expensive than outsourcing to an agency. Now, another positive is that you are in control of your own vision. Now, we've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs who have actually tried outsourcing in the past. And one of the most common negatives for them throughout that process is that it can be really hard to convey your own app idea to someone else or to a team of developers. And so sometimes you end up with a product, a minimum viable product, an app that's just not exactly what you pictured. If you build the app yourself, this is under your control. You can build it exactly how you want. So that's a big positive to that DIY route, but there are obviously going to be some trade-offs. Now, the first is that it's going to take you a lot longer. You have to build those skills. You have to do that trial and error. That's a part of the learning process. You're going to have to do a lot of research along the way to figure out which next steps to take. It's just going to take you longer. And potentially, you could have to rebuild later. We've seen this happen with founders before where they take the DIY route from the very beginning and they learn and they do the trial and error as they go. But by the time they've built their app, once they're on the other side of things, at that point, they have learned a lot and they have gained a lot of experience, and they realize that looking back, they should have built their app much differently. So a lot of them have to end up rebuilding anyways, now that they do have that knowledge and those skills built up. So it could potentially mean rebuilding your app down the road. Now, of course, there are going to be pros and cons with outsourcing as well. Now, one of the positives, of course, is that it's a lot faster. You're getting that advantage of speed. You can move much more quickly, and there is going to be much, much less guesswork on your end because the development is not up to you. So you don't have to do that trial and error. You don't have to guess your way through development. Those are some really big positives to outsourcing. But again, there are going to be some trade-offs. Now, the first is that it's going to be a lot more expensive. It's going to cost you a lot more. You're going to be paying for that speed and for that ability to just have it done for you and not have to figure it out yourself. And you're not going to be in full control because you are not building the app. So you can convey your vision as best you can, but at the end of the day, you're not going to be 100% in control of the outcome. So those are some of the main pros and cons of each of these paths. Now, what can each of these look like? Well, if you take the DIY approach, you're building your app yourself. This still might involve you going through paid courses, for example, using training material to help lower that learning curve. So you could still be going through courses as you build your app to help you along the way. With outsourcing, this can potentially be 100% hands off for you, depending on the agency you're working with. This can be 100% hands off. Now, of course, the price is going to reflect that, but that's one of the factors that comes along with outsourcing is, of course, the price. Now, before we go any further, in reality, there are actually more than these two routes that you can go down to build your app. There's a third, and I'm a little biased, but this one happens to be our favorite, and this is the done with you approach. So you have your DIY approach where you're doing it yourself. You have your done for you approach where the app is being built for you. You're outsourcing. But you also have a DWY approach, done with you. Now, this can look like building the app yourself, but maybe working with a consultant along the way to help guide you. It can even look like going through our own Built to Scale program, where we take founders from their idea stage to having that minimum viable product that they can start bringing their test users onto. So you can take this done with you approach as well. And in reality, it combines the positives or the best of both worlds, because you're still going to be saving money compared to outsourcing your app. And you're still going to be in full control of your own idea, right? You know your process is best. You know the app best, the solution that you've come up with. So you're still going to be the one in the driver's seat in control of building that. But your process or your development timeframe is also going to be a lot faster because you're not going through that constant trial and error and all of the researching phases. It's going to be a lot faster, and there's going to be a lot less guesswork for the exact same reasons. So, you know, the done with you approach can really be the best of both worlds. So you have to consider that as well. There are 3 different approaches you can take to building your app. Now, I want to talk about pricing because this is a really big factor in the decision-making process. Regardless of the positives to each of these approaches, you have to think about pricing too. So, in terms of pricing, and I do want to say this is with a caveat that I'm assuming you're wanting to build a quality app. It can be hard to talk about pricing because you're always going to be able to find a cheaper route, but you're going to be sacrificing on quality the cheaper you go for each option. So this is with a caveat what I'm about to say, and that's that I'm assuming you're wanting to build a quality app. Now, if that's the case, this is what that can look like. So if you go that full DIY approach where you are building the app entirely on your own, but you're wanting to build that quality app, that might look like you going through paid training, paid courses, for example, to help you through the process of building your app. And in that case, this could cost you in the hundreds of dollars, depending on what you go with. But if you're paying for some sort of training, this could potentially cost you in the hundreds of dollars. Now, for the done with you approach, where you are in the driver's seat, but you, for example, have a team of mentors behind you. Again, assuming you're going for that quality, this can be in the thousands, okay? Now for that done for you approach, where you're outsourcing, this could mean working with an agency. This can potentially cost you in the tens of thousands and beyond. This really depends because there's lots of variation there. So the DIY approach, this could potentially be, you know, a 3-figure investment if you in fact are investing in your own training and building your own skills. For that done with you approach, this could be more of a 4-figure investment where you're working with a team of mentors to build that quality app. And with the done for you approach, where you're outsourcing and potentially working with an agency, this can be more of a 5-figure investment and really beyond, because it's going to depend a lot on what your app ends up looking like in those post-MVP stages, in that ongoing maintenance and expansion phase, because we're looking at the lifetime of your app here. And if you're outsourcing at the beginning, well, then chances are you're going to be outsourcing for the lifetime as well. So you have to take that into account beyond that initial development. So I hope this was helpful. in giving you an idea of what these processes look like depending on which path you take, whether you build the app yourself, build it with a team of mentors, for example, or outsource entirely. And I hope it helps you make the right decision for you and your app. And if you are interested in taking that done with you approach and you want to learn more about how we help our own founders maintain that control as they build their own app, as they take that vision, that idea to becoming a minimum viable product, then head to coachingnocodeapps.com/apply. And you'll schedule a free strategy call. You'll send over some details, and we'll start the conversation from there to talk about what that would look like. So again, I hope this was helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll talk soon.